Hello, my name is Jenna Gibson. I'm the Assistant Director of the O'Brien Notre Dame International Security Center. And today I'm here with Professor Bridget Coggins, who is an Associate Professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Professor Coggins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to hear more about your talk that you're going to be giving here at ONDISC. Can you give us the short summary of what you want people to take away from this talk today?
Sure. The first thing that's most important is for us to understand that while failed states feel scary, not just for international publics or outside publics, but also for state leaders outside the failed state, in fact, they're quite benign and really more a humanitarian problem than they are a security risk.
So before we talk a little bit about how to deal with some of these states, can you give us an idea of what is a failed state?
One of the things that I'll talk a lot about in the book, or in the presentation today, but also in the wider book project from which it's drawn, is that there are actually a lot of contested definitions of what state failure is and how it manifests in the real world. The original definition of the term comes from a couple of political scientists / public policy types that were concerned that not only were there countries that were weak and very weak and having a hard time providing public goods and services and important things like health and education for their publics, but they were also just fundamentally unable to participate in international affairs as normal states in good standing. There are too few of them, too few of the diplomats that they would need, and they were just not functionally capable of engaging with the international system. And so that's what the kind of concept state failure is. When it comes to seeing state failure out in the world, that's where the contested definitions, come, right? So what we would call the operational definitions are many, and there's quite a bit of variance in between. And so we will look a little bit at why that's the case and about how problematic it is that when you have those contested empirical definitions, it makes many states, even states that otherwise would think that they are in pretty good standing, concerned about intervention and threatening outsiders coming in for regime change and kind of self-defensive state building in those states.
Do you feel like there's any myths or misunderstandings that's important we learn more about those contested definitions, for example, or what do people not understand about failed states and how to deal with them?
One of the things that I think is less understood about the way that the liberal order works, or how it used to work when it was humming along, is that the United States and many of the allies are really dedicated to helping to bring data and so therefore make legible and understandable the populations in countries whose governments were so weak that they couldn't provide information themselves, right? And that was on everything from how many people don't have running clean water or electricity to who has or doesn't have what disease and whether or not they've been vaccinated or not. So governments that were incredibly weak, governments that were on the precipice of failure, had huge amounts of, at least in terms of these governments and how much they had and how much they could bring to bear to solve their own problems, huge outside help in understanding and having data about their own populations. And so what we've seen recently, and very recently, is that there's been an attack on data international data worldwide. This came primarily from the Trump administration, which has pulled back huge amounts of foreign aid data, but also, and foreign aid, but also participation and collaboration with international organizations such as the World Health Organization, right? The Trump administration is simply pulling back and is becoming less transparent itself. So we are also in the United States broadcasting and providing less data about what's happening within the United States. And that is also threatening to outsiders. And so I think that that lack of information is going to prove to be pretty destabilizing when it comes to these kind of unknown fledgling states in the international system.
Can you say a little bit more about that and about the particular problems of not just these problems being very difficult and intractable potentially, but also not necessarily having the data or not necessarily having the information to know what the problems are? I imagine that's particularly difficult when you're trying to create a foreign policy to deal with states like these failed states.
That's right. So data is foundational to problem identification, right? So before we can develop good policy, we first have to really understand what it is that we're facing. So I'm not saying that the United States is responsible or that the international community would be responsible for the creation of the infrastructure and development to help these countries to produce data for themselves. I'm simply saying that the provision of this public good of information, of data about some of the potential threats and kind of bad things that might be happening in fledgling states is in the international communities and certainly the United States' interest to collect and to provide. And that'll help the United States to make better decisions, to identify problems that are real problems, right? The United States has been involved in a number of disastrous interventions in recent years, that have caused countless deaths, bloodshed. We've spent a lot of money and for not great security returns, right? And so helping to ensure that we at least are not casting about at threats that might not actually be there, right? Might be humanitarian problems instead of real security threats, is certainly in our interest. And I think will also, just as a side benefit, help to gain back a bit of the reputational loss that the United States has suffered in recent months.
Are there any other trends or issues that you see emerging, things that you're following that might make this a particularly difficult or unstable time in dealing with weak or failed states?
Yes. So one of the things that I'm concerned about is what we see going on right now in Venezuela. If you are kind of new to paying attention to Venezuela because of drug trafficking and because of the military actions and mobilization that we've seen, it's important to know that this is not the first time that Venezuela is on the Trump administration's radar because of its purported failure to control especially drug gangs, but crime and corruption from seeping out of its borders and affecting states as far away as the United States, right? And there is little, because Venezuela is such a black box at this moment, because it has been so isolated, because the sanctions have been imposed. There's little information to dissuade either, right? And so We need to think carefully about the way that we either collect or choose not to collect data when it comes to the use of force abroad. My impulse is to not be conspiratorial about this and think that the administration actually does see a threat in trafficking coming from Venezuela. And I do think that it is important, but it is also the case that if we looked into the data, we would see that Venezuela actually is a fairly capable state nevertheless, and could easily be, or at least effectively be, diplomatically engaged and need not be militarily engaged in order for this to stop. It's not a fundamental lack of capacity. Indeed, a government does exist, and this is precisely why we have diplomatic avenues instead of military ones.